Do you feel, Arpin, how it's hockey season? You go outside and it feels like hockey.
Oh my God. No, I don't.
30, 35
Oh,
degrees, something like that.
I
Not,
literally just before the podcast, I went out and bought two fans, and
yeah.
I'm sitting in front of one right now. And so yeah,
Did you
but
buy it at OnlyFans?
no,
Okay. Okay. All right.
no, no, I did not. Um,
Okay. Well, everybody, welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook on Monday, June 23rd.
thank God.
Busy show today. We are only, 5 days away, less than 5 days away from the NHL draft. So there's going to be plenty of draft talk today. Discuss what we think the Canadians are going to do, who they should take. Are they even going to talk twice on Friday night? There was a bit of news around the NHL with the trade of Trevor Zegras to the Philadelphia Flyers. Could the Canadians have been on that? We know that there was a history of them being interested in Zegras a while ago. We're going to have also a segment, 3 moves we would make. Things that we think, each of us, we've identified 3 moves that we would make if we were GMs of the Canadians to try to make that team better. And we're going to compare notes and see if it makes sense at all. And obviously, just like every Monday, we have our mailbag. But Arpin, let's kick things off with the fact that tomorrow, June 24th, the Hall of Fame at 3 p.m. Eastern Time is going to announce not only the nominees, but the people who are actually getting into the Hockey Hall of Fame for this season. And Carey Price has a decent chance of going in.
Yeah.
How do you like his chances, at least for his first years of eligibility?
Uh, I think they're pretty good, honestly. I think they're pretty good. Lundqvist didn't have to wait, right? I mean,
No.
he was first ballot, and so that's a bit of a tell. Now, I think Lundqvist had a more prolonged period of excellence to Price. Doesn't have maybe quite the same international resume as Price, but in the NHL, I think his runway of elite play, um, probably extended Price, or actually was had a more uninterrupted run, let's say, than
Mm.
Price. But I think um, being holding all the records that he holds in Canadians franchise history, a franchise that has God knows how many Hall of Fame goaltenders among its ranks. The fact that Price is ahead of all of them, I think, will weigh heavily with the voters. The fact how he navigated the market in Montreal as a starting goaltender for as long as he did. His peak was maybe a little bit too short, but it was historic. There was a time during Price's career. It was maybe an 18 to 24-month period where you could make a legitimate argument that Carey Price was the best hockey player in the world. Like
Yeah.
you could make that argument. I mean, you might not win it every time, but it was a valid argument to make. And so I think all those things combined, um, has a heart, has a Vezina, obviously came in that peak window, reached a cup final at the very end. Um,
We
and
tend to
just
forget it, but he won the Lou Marsh Trophy for Athlete of the Year in
he did.
Canada, all
That's true.
sports included.
That's true. Yes. And so I think he'll get in. I would also say that I would understand if he had to wait a year. There are some people who have been waiting for a long time. Alexander McGillney being tops on the list. I would imagine at some point the people who vote on these things will put him in the Hall of Fame as he rightfully belongs. But that's in my opinion. But yeah, I think he has. I think he has a pretty good chance. I don't think I'll be outraged if he doesn't, though. If he has to wait a year.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's going to be the year for McGillney though, because you look at the first time eligible, among which Carey Price, yes, but Zdeno Chara should be a first ballot Hall of
Yeah,
Famer.
for sure.
Um, Duncan Keith also 3 Stanley Cups. He's got a Norris. He's got a Conn Smythe. Man, he's got an amazing resume. I would suspect that he would go into. And
Yeah,
then since they have three former NHL players every year, the third one, I think it is going to be between Price and Joe Thornton.
yeah.
So all first timers, and then you have those who have been waiting a long time. But it's really a good crop. And then after that, beyond those four guys who I think are the legitimate first ballot contenders, you got Ryan Getzlaff, who's probably going to be considered, and maybe Jason Spezza. I don't know.
Mhm.
But those are all very good candidates. As for Price, I think you mentioned Lundqvist, who got into at his first year of eligibility, didn't win the cup. Same can be said for Roberto Luongo also, but there's
Yeah.
not a ton of goalies who got even in the Hall of Fame without winning the Stanley Cup. I suspect that it's bound to change because Luongo and Lundqvist maybe are starting a trend, and Price, whether it's this year or next year, he's going to get in. There's no doubt about it. Prior
Hmm.
to that, in the '80s, there was Ed Jacquemin from the New York Rangers. He never won a cup, but there's not that many. Let's say in modern hockey, but it's bound to change. And the thing with Price is that in Montreal we got so accustomed to him being there every night.
Hmm.
And the same way, it's draft season right now, and we hear a lot. Scouts say at some point, this kid has been over scouted. We've watched him for so long that we see only his warts and not necessarily his positive qualities. Well, Carey Price, as a netminder for the Canadians, it was exactly that. At some point, his mastery had been taken for granted, and his warts for a long time was what seemed to be more top of mind for at least for a lot of Montreal Canadiens fans. But you go outside of the market. I mean, among his peers, he was constant year after year. He was considered the best goalie in the league, by NHL
Yes.
players, and the recognition, the name recognition that followed him everywhere in the NHL also is a tell that if you just take a step back and say, leave your hardcore fandom of the Montreal Canadiens aside and take the temperature down a little bit, you'll realize that Carey Price did a number of great things for this team. And
Hmm.
I feel as though towards the end of his career, there was more of a recognition, a reconciliation of how good he was and how the fact that the Canadians, the fans accepted how great he was, despite the fact that he didn't bring them a cup. Whether it's with passing Jacques Plante for the number of games, the number of wins, and the fact that in the end there was, yeah, I feel as though the last couple of years of him being the goalie for the Canadians, there was everybody came at peace because it had started on such a weird note. Not started, but with the whole Halak thing that divided the fans in two for a number of years. Some seemed like they
Oh,
never
for really
recovered from that
1 year.
grudge.
1 year. It was basically 1 year where there
Well,
was really, yeah.
yeah, but the fans who said it should have been Halak, it lasted for more than 1 year.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe.
I'm sure among
And
our
then
listeners, there's some that will grudgingly admit that they carried that for a while. But
Team Halak never admits. Team Halak never admits that they were Team Halak. But
no,
it's I don't think it lasts. I mean, I think it became pretty clear shortly after that year that they made the right decision. I
yeah.
mean, that season, Carey Price started 70 games, won 38 of them, had a 923 save percentage and a 235 goals against with 8 shutouts. That's the
Mm-hmm.
year after Halak was traded. So you'd have to be a pretty stubborn Team Halak guy to look at that and be like, oh, we should have kept Halak. Like he pretty quickly put that to bed, I thought.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, and I mean when it's all said and done, it's silly. It's a silly comparison even to make. It was
Yeah.
the choice was obvious, but back in those days, on the heels of Halak being so good and Carey Price not necessarily taking over and being dominant right from the get go after Halak left, maybe that it created some doubts. But you mentioned, I mean, those years of dominance. I think you refer mainly to 2014, 2015, where
Yeah.
he was just lights out, and that's those are the years that when the 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 panel at the Hall of Fame will assess his career and his numbers and his achievements. Those 2 years will weigh, I guess, very heavily in the overall resume that he's presenting.
Yeah. And, there's also, I don't know if the Canadians would have won the cup that year, but, the fact that he was taken out that
Yeah.
year in the conference final, not to get into the debate of whether Kreider did that on purpose, but the result is clear. He was taken out of that series, and he was the Canadians' best chance of winning that series and winning a cup that year. Um, that would have changed this conversation significantly had he been able to lead the Montreal to a cup that year. He was playing well enough to do that. Um, so I don't know if voters will take that into account, but it's worth mentioning at least in the discussion. But when you list the four first timers, could you really be? I think other than could you really be that upset if Joe Thornton got in as a first ballot and Price didn't? And
No,
or
no, no.
if like so that's going to be interesting because goalies usually do get shortchanged in this process. They were quick with Lundqvist. They were quick with Luongo too, right? Luongo got in first ballot, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah, he did.
So they're pretty similar cases to Price. Um, Lundqvist played whole career in a very heavily scrutinized big market. Was the best player on his team for as long. I remember I wrote a story one year how similar Price and Lundqvist were to each other. And I remember speaking to Lundqvist in Tarrytown about it, and he was actually really great. He's really like just kind of how he kind of spent. He'd always looked at Price from New York and how he had to manage what he dealt with in Montreal, which was different from Lundqvist. They're not the only show in town. It's not the Rangers fans are extremely passionate. They want the Rangers to do well, but it's not the singular focus on their team in their city that the Canadians have in Montreal. And he always kind of admired how Price handled that. He could live a slightly more normal life in New York, even though he was a megastar there, and not to say that he could just walk the streets anonymously, but it was definitely a different dynamic for him in New York. And it was interesting talking to how he viewed that difference. But yeah, it's. I just hope that I just hope Price has the foresight to not be golfing at that time, the way Shea Weber was. I hope Shea has spoken to Carey Price and said, "Hey, listen, you know what? That was pretty stupid on my part to be on a golf course at that time. I would suggest you not do the same. Like, just clear your afternoon.
How
If
about
if
it?
it gets,
What if he's gone game hunting?
yeah,
That
he's
would
he's not he's not reachable. He has no
yeah,
cell
that's
signal. Yeah,
that's it.
that would be the
Yeah,
most Carey Price thing ever. If he makes the Hall of Fame, he's out in the bush somewhere
yeah.
hunting, sitting in a tree by himself, no one around, no one can reach him, and that's it. That would be the way he gets in the Hall of Fame. And like 3 days later, he emerges to find out that he's been elected to the Hall of Fame. But I would actually, now that you mentioned that, I kind of hope that that's what happens. I really sincerely hope that that's what happens. But